Hey, folks, this is Larry Messina. I wanted to give you a quick example for week one in Math 101 on some of the concepts we're covering, things like finding the slope of a line, finding the equation of a line, finding the y-intercept and x-intercept. So these are typical questions that you'll be working on here during week one. So first of all, what we're working with here is an equation that has two letters in it. The equation we sometimes write as y equals mx plus b. An example might be something like y equals 3x plus 7, just to make up an example. Well, it turns out this equation has an infinite number of solutions, many, many solutions. Now, what is a solution? Well, a solution is any pair of numbers, x and y. We write them in this ordered way. We call this an ordered pair. The x number always comes first. The y number always comes second in these parentheses. And if these xy numbers make this equation true, we call it a solution. Let me give you a couple of examples. How about if x is 0 and y is 7? Is this a solution? Well, yes, it is, because if you take this equation, replace the y with a 7, and replace the x with a 0, you get a true equation. 3 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 7 is 7, so I end up with 7 equals 7. That's a true equation. So 0 comma 7 is one solution. But I could come up with another solution. How about if I come up with x equals 1, y equals 10? Let me check if that's a solution. Y equals 3x plus 7. I'm going to replace y with 10 and x with 1. Well, 3 times 1 is 3. 3 plus 7 is 10, so I'm ending up with 10 equals 10. So that means 1 comma 10 is another solution. Well, you can keep repeating this over and over. I'll give you another example, a 2 comma 13. That's a solution. A negative 1 comma 4 is a solution. And I could keep going on and on. So there's infinite, many, many, many solutions. Well, we don't want to write all these solutions out. Instead, what we do is we graph these on a coordinate system. So the graph we set up is a horizontal number line that we call the x-axis. So this number line has 1, 2, 3, 4 going to the right, -1, -2, -3 going to the left. And the y-axis is this vertical axis. This is a number line going up and down. So this is going to be 1, 2, 3 going up, -1, -2, -3 going downwards like this. And so when you want to plot one of these points, these solutions can be plotted. The first number is the horizontal distance to travel. The second number is the vertical distance to travel. For example, let's plot -1 comma 4. What that's telling me to do is start here at the origin, go horizontally -1. That really means go to the left one. So I would go to the left one. And the 4 is telling me go up 4, because that second number is always the vertical distance. So I'm going to go up 4, and I'll put a dot right here. This dot is the location -1 comma. Now, if I plotted more of these points, 0 comma 7 would be up here on the y-axis. Once you start plotting all of these points, you'll notice all of these points will line up on a straight line. When you connect these points with a straight line, that's the graph that we're interested in. All right, so that's the background about working with these kinds of equations. When you have an equation like this that has two letters and two variables, we call it x and y, there's going to be an infinite number of solutions, but you can't write out all the solutions. Instead, we create this graph, a straight line, and every point that falls on this graph is a solution to that equation. All right, well, let's go to this problem. It says first, what is the slope of a line passing through these 2 points? How about if I plot these points and see what this line looks like just to begin with? I don't have to do this, but it's always a good idea to see what the line looks like. So 1 comma 6. Start here at the origin. Go horizontally 1, vertically 6. That's this point right here. So this is 1 comma 6. Let me plot 3, -2. All right, for 3, -2, I would go horizontally 3 and vertically down -2. So this point right here would be 3, -2. I'm going to connect these points with a straight line. And this straight line, I didn't do that very well. This straight line is, let me redo that. That's not a good, I want the line to pass through the 2 points, of course. So I'm going to do it more like this, I think. That's better. This line is the straight line that we're interested in finding the slope of. Now, the slope is just a number that measures how steep the line is. When a line goes downhill like this, the slope is going to be a negative number. Let me make a note of that because that's going to be useful to keep in mind. If the line extends downhill like this, when I say downhill, I mean going downhill from left to right, then the slope is a negative number. What about if the graph went uphill? So if the line extends uphill, going from left to right, then the slope should be a positive number. So slope is a positive number. All right, well, how do you find the slope of a line if you know the 2 points? Well, it turns out, let me call this question A. For question A, we can use a slope formula. Now, for slope, we use the letter M, and it's going to be y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. So what does this mean? Well, when you set up these 2 points, you label them. The first point you're going to label as x sub 1, y sub 1. The second point you label as x sub 2, y sub 2. Now you plug into this formula. Well, on the top, I want to grab y sub 2. Our y sub 2 number here is -2. And then we subtract whatever the y sub 1 number is. Our y sub 1 number is 6. Let me go to the bottom of this fraction. We need x sub 2 subtract x sub 1. The x sub 2 number for us is 3. Now I got to subtract the x sub 1 number, which is 1. All right, let me work this out. On the top, -2 subtract 6, that's a -8. On the bottom, 3 subtract 1, that's 2. -8 divided by 2 is a -4. So this is our slope. So the slope of this red line we just figured out is negative. We call this M. So M is negative. So that's the answer to part A. It makes sense that our answer is negative because remember, when a line extends downhill, we expect the slope to be negative, and our slope is negative. All right, let's go to part B. Part B says, what is the equation of the line? Well, there's 2 formats you can use for this. I'm going to use this format. Excuse me, that's called the point slope form of a line. And the reason I'm doing that is I know a point and I know the slope. So when you have the point and the slope, you can use this point slope form. Here's what the equation looks like. Y sub 2 let me write it like this. I'm sorry. Y minus y1 equals mx minus x1. Now, this x and this y are going to be left alone because remember, we want the equation to look like y equals mx plus b. But I'm going to substitute for all the other quantities in this problem. Let me drop in our y1. Our y1, if you remember, was this number 6. The slope m we just figured out is -4. The x I'm going to leave alone, but the x1 in our example was the value 1. So this is going to be x minus 1. Now, usually we like to write this equation where y is by itself on the left-hand side. So here's what I'm going to do to get started. I'm going to take this -4 and let it multiply inside the parenthesis. -4 times x is -4x. I'm going to think of this as a -4 multiplying a -1 in the back. But negative times negative is positive, so that's going to be a positive. One last step. I want to get y by itself. So I'm going to add 6 to both sides because that will get rid of this subtraction of 6. So I'm going to add 6 to both sides of this. What I'm left with is y equals negative 4x plus 10. So that's the answer to part B, y equals negative 4x plus 10. Now, let me erase a little bit of this so I can make a few more comments here. When you write the equation in this format with y by itself, you can immediately know the slope and what's called the y-intercept. So here's our equation, y equals negative 4x plus 10. Well, we compare this to y equals mx plus b. This m is the slope of the line. In our example, it matches up to negative 4. We knew the slope was negative 4 because we figured that out in part A of the problem. But this b number back here is helpful because this b number is called the y-intercept. So the y-intercept for us is 10. The y-intercept is telling you that the graph crosses the y-axis at a height of 10. So what I could do is put a dot right here on 10. And I know this graph has a slope of negative 4. Negative slope means going downhill like this. So here is the slope negative. All right, let me go to part C of the question. Part C says, what is the y-intercept of this line? Well, we know that because we just compared our equation to y equals mx plus b, and the y-intercept was 10. So our y-intercept is 10. Now, I could write that in the xy notation. This would be 0, 10. Because to get to this black dot, I would go horizontally nowhere and then vertically 10. So another way to write the y-intercept is 0, 10. One more question. What is the x-intercept? Well, the x-intercept is asking you, where does the graph cross this x-axis? So this point right here is the x-intercept. They're asking us to figure that out. Well, here's what I could do to figure out the x-intercept. This x-intercept, this black dot here, has a height of 0. Excuse me. It has a height of 0. That means this x-intercept is going to be some number, comma 0. If it has a height of 0, the y value should be 0 then. Well, that means in this equation, I can replace y with 0 in order to find the x-intercept. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to to find the x-intercept, you let y equal 0 in the equation and solve for x then. Then solve for x. That answer gets you the x-intercept. All right, I'm going to let this y be a 0. I'm going to add 4x to both sides because then I'll get the x's over to the left side. So I'm going to add 4x to both sides here. That'll cancel this out. I have 4x equals 10. Let me finish it up over here maybe. So we have 4x equals 10. I want to get x by itself. I'll divide both sides by 4 then because the 4 on top cancels out the 4 on the bottom. I have x equals 10 over 4, which I could write as 2.5. So this x-intercept is 2.5, 0. So the answer to part D is 2.5, 0. All right, folks, hope this is helpful as you're getting started here in week 1. Please let me know if there's any questions.